Hello everyone, Ron Johnson here from L.T.L Tutoring Central, and if you're looking for tips and strategies to help with your learning, you are in the right place. Reading fiction for meaning. Now, I've talked before about reading for meaning and maybe touched on fiction a little bit, but I wanted to make a video specifically for fiction and reading for meaning. And you might say to yourself, why would I want to read fiction for meaning? Or why would I want to destroy my enjoyment of reading fiction? Well, I agree on one hand and disagree on another. Here's the thing. I think you should always enjoy reading, whatever you're reading. Try to get some enjoyment out of it. And sometimes, if it's a science text or geography or something, you might have to put a little effort into finding your way to engage with the material. But with short stories and novels and plays, yes, they should definitely be read for enjoyment, but they should also be read for meaning. Not only if you're taking an academic course, in which case you probably will need to do a test or an exam. You may need to write an essay or present a seminar or some other kind of presentation. So obviously you need to read for meaning. Sorry, I'm just checking here. I seem to be squeaking. Uh, so, but also, if you're just reading for yourself, if you're just reading literally for pleasure, but if you read for meaning, you get so much more out of it. And yes, there might be some novels that are light novels, let's say, or formulaic novels that don't have a lot of deeper meaning in them, but there are many that do have other plot points or thoughts, ideas that you can extract from them and get more out of it. And also, if you're reading for meaning, you will remember more of the story. And that's also very useful. And it's also very pleasurable. It adds to the enjoyment of reading. So here are a few tips to help when reading fiction for meaning. First of all, I always like to sketch out a character chart or list, and it could literally be a type of sketch where I'm sort of drawing lines or arrows. Generally start off with the protagonist or the antagonist or both if there are such things, then they're not always the same in every story and novel or play. But start off with the main characters, and then I draw lines to their parents, to their siblings, to their friends, and then beside that I draw a line and put just a couple of points about each one, just to give me a quick reminder of who these people are and what their primary characteristics are. And that changes as I go through the novel. And obviously, for all of these points, leave space. If you're doing it in a book or on paper, you need to leave some lines or some space from left to right so that you can draw out this character chart or list and some of the other ideas I'm going to mention as well. If you're doing it on a computer or some other device, it's a little easier to move whole chunks around, but it's still a good idea just to leave yourself some space to add in details as you read through and find out new information about the characters, for example. I'll put a link below to the blog because on the blog there will be an example of a brief character chart for the novel The Catcher in the Rye. Plot points is the next thing. And all of these first ones I'm mentioning are things that you would note. So you draw up a character chart or list, then plot points. And I always recommend going chapter by chapter, or if you're doing a play, you can do act and scene. And just point form, you can do point form, jot down the main things that happen in that chapter. So if it's a short chapter, read the whole chapter and then make your notes. Don't do it line by line or page by page even, because everything's going to sound important at the beginning. But if you get a whole chunk, in other words, a whole chapter, then you can really extract what was the main ideas or the main points in this chapter. If the chapters are very long, you will have to maybe break that down, maybe cut it in half or a third, depending on the size of the chapter, and take your notes in that way, but still read a substantial amount or chunk of material before you take your notes to ensure that you're just not noting every single detail. They're not all important. So as you do this, you'll learn what's the most important. And really, they're very, very brief notes. They should be very, very brief. You can also make notes on the setting. I usually just include that with the plot. I don't do normally a separate one unless the setting is a kind of primary character, which it is in a few stories. But generally, the setting can fit in with the plot or even with the character chart or list sometimes. Uh, Track new vocabulary. So if there are vocabulary words that you're unfamiliar with, and especially if they keep repeating throughout the novel or the story, uh, make a note of them. You can either keep a list at the back of your book if you're doing it in a scribbler or a notebook, which I like to do. But if you're doing it on a device, obviously you can just do a separate document and have sort of your own mini dictionary. I've mentioned this in previous videos. And that way you can quickly check certain words. And if it's attached to the particular novel or play that you're reading, it'll be very easy to find. And because that author tends to use these words over and over again, because all authors have a certain sort of repertoire of vocabulary that they are going to use. And I have noticed when I'm reading, especially a new author, I mean, new to me, not necessarily new, maybe long dead, but a new author, especially if it's a fairly deep book. It might not even be a fiction, it might be a nonfiction. I'll see a word and I think, oh, I haven't heard that word, or I haven't heard it in a long time. I better look that up. And then I see it again and again and again. This author obviously likes this word, so they do tend to use them over and over. So make a little note, and then once you've checked it a few times, you'll probably remember it, at least for the length of that novel. Now, these things you just think about. Now, they can also enter into your notes in some ways if you want them to, particularly if you're doing academic study. But a lot of it is just thinking about, things to think about. Network knowledge to yourself. I talk about this a lot. Whenever you're reading anything, try to connect it to you because hopefully you like yourself and you remember things about yourself. So if you network the knowledge to yourself, you're more likely to remember it. So think of the characters. Are there any qualities that remind you of you or experiences that you've had or events in the plot that maybe you didn't have the exact one, but there's something that you can connect it to and say, this is a little bit like this. You can also, when I say to yourself, it means also to your circle, your friends, your family, people you know. So possibly a character reminds you of a friend of yours, or a brother, or sister, or mother, or something like this. So you know, networking to yourself is you and your surroundings. Also, network knowledge to current events. So whatever's happening in the novel, play, poem, whatever you're reading. Uh, does it connect in some way to what's happening today in the news, in politics, etc.? So things that you've heard, things that you've seen. Also, you can network to historical events, historical characters or events, things that have happened in the past and that you might be aware of. And you think, well, this reminds me of something that happened in the 1500s that I read about or whatever. But it might not be that long ago. It might be more recent events. But the idea is to keep thinking of this network or this web of knowledge and make as many connections as you can. Again, a lot of this can just happen in your mind, and you can keep expanding and thinking and then rejecting and changing. Just working with this material in your mind will help you to remember it, thinking about it. I am reading a book right now that is very, very interesting. It's quite long. It's quite in depth. It's a nonfiction actually. I may make a video about it at some time. We'll see. But it has very, I shouldn't say it has short chapters, but it has short sections within its chapters. So I read a couple of them, then I walk and I talk to myself, or I think to myself about what I've just read to help me to recall and to remember that information and make connections wherever possible to things I've heard before. Often other videos or other people's talks, for example. A network knowledge to other books, movies, etc. That's what I've been talking about all the way along. Um, Anything that you can make a connection to will help you to remember. And this might sound very obvious at the moment because I'm saying it out loud, but people forget about doing this. If you don't actually do it, it doesn't work. And what happens is we often read, I do the same thing. I read through a chapter or a couple of chapters. And then the next day I realized I don't remember what I read that, but I don't remember anything about it because I didn't work with it. I didn't think about it long enough. I didn't actually let it get inside of my brain into longer term memory. So the more connections you can make, the better in terms of remembering. And you don't want to note all of these things because some of them might be quite extraneous and might be quite detailed, and you might at some point think, that doesn't make sense. Scribble that. So you don't want to keep noting all of this and having to rearrange it. These are just thought processes. But if you come up with some really good kernels or some really good uh, connections or ideas, you might want to add a note into your plot points, or maybe even a separate note where you're just keeping ideas about this. I sometimes jot down ideas or thoughts, and then you jot down a few things just to remind you to make those connections. Okay, I'm not going to ramble too much longer. I tend to do that when I get talking. I will say a little reminder here. When I make these videos, I do no to very little editing. So if I make mistakes, you're going to see the mistakes. I like to pretend I'm actually just talking to you. I'm just having a conversation with you, just the same as I would behind me at the big table here where we do all the tutoring. And if you've watched many of my videos, you probably have seen some of the files have been moved around because the basic setting stays the same, but the files are moving around every day as students come and go. Don't forget to check out the links below. If you want some personalized tutoring, of course, I'm always available to talk to. Just if you're watching on YouTube, you can check out the www.tutoringcentral.com, go to the website, or shoot me an email and we can set something up, a free information meeting if you like. In the meantime, keep reading and have fun reading, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, because you can enjoy fiction, you can also enjoy nonfiction, you can learn from fiction, and obviously you can learn from nonfiction. So there's no reason not to get everything out of both types of reading. All right, it's Ron Johnson from L.T.L Tutoring Central. Have fun and keep learning. Bye-bye for now.